I haven't got a predetermined conclusion for this car. I am just literally computing everything now, and hello guys, and welcome to this Volks Wizard video. And it's a video I've been trying to make for the past 2.5 years, because back in the summer of 2017 I made a little video comparing Mk5 Golf R32 with the Mk5 version, and the Mk5 came out on top, so it seemed only right that it should go on to do battle with another highly regarded Mk5 Golf based hot hatch, the Golf GTI Edition 30. It's taken all that time to get these cars together, because even though I am a car dealer, I don't buy cars specifically to make videos with, but obviously when they're in stock it's too good an opportunity to miss. And the other good news is you can buy these cars today. They're currently for sale. For more information, visit volkswizard.co.uk. That's the end of any advertising, I promise. Now let's cast our minds back to 2008, when these two cars were for sale simultaneously in the Volkswagen range. The Golf R32 was the superior car. It was roughly 10% more of everything compared to the GTI. So 10% more power, roughly 10% more torque, 10% more asking price at about £24,500, and unfortunately 10% more weight, but we'll come to that later. They were for sale at the same time from 2006 to about 2008, when the range was superseded by the Mk6, but the R32 predated the Edition 30 by about a year, so you could buy those from 2005 onwards. And in that year it was already getting a hard time from the 200 horsepower Mk5 Golf GTI in the press reviews, and things didn't get any better when the Edition 30 came out. But I'm a firm believer, you shouldn't believe what you read in the news, and I thought we'd make our own opinions on it today. And the world has changed a lot in the intervening 12 years as well, so priorities back in 2008 may be a bit different now, and cars are a lot different with emissions and exhaust filters as well, quietening them down. I mean, the thought of a V6 engine in a Golf today seems absolutely insane, but we had them from 1992 in the Golf VR6 to 2008 in the R32, so we had a pretty good run. So without any further ado, let's start as you would in the brochure and have a look at the Golf GTI Edition 30. Okay, so this is a 2008 Mk5 Golf GTI Edition 30 5-door, manual gearbox, Tornado Red paintwork. It's on an 08 reg, which means it was registered in the middle of 2008, one of the last really, there are a few later. It's a 2008 model year car. They started off in the UK on a 56 reg, so late 2006, and they were 2007 model year at the time, but there's not really many differences. There are only a couple of options I can tell you about on this car. That's cruise control and rear parking sensors, which, believe it or not, were still quite rare back in 2008. So everything else you see is standard for this model, including the 18-inch BBS wheels, the body-coloured sort of lower sections of the car, which are slightly more bold than on the standard GTI. You get tartan inside with leather. You get red edge floor mats, so these are actually aftermarket ones. You don't get a GTI badge there, but it looks pretty good. You get Edition 30 on the sills. You get a cheap looking Edition 30 sticker there, but for the UK market you could write to Volkswagen UK and they would send you a unique number, and that's been fitted on the centre console. On this car they should be really on the door, but you can see it more there, and I guess that's where it was on the Club Sport S. Typical Golf practicality, Golf 5 is a great size and yeah, accommodates 5 people pretty comfortably. You've got cherry red light clusters on the Edition 30, which, funny enough, are the same as the ones on the R32. Twin exhaust down there. The only external badge that says Edition 30 is that one there. You get obviously a big boot, slightly bigger than that on the R32, as we'll come to. You get a space saver spare, a ski hatch as well, and a handy little net. Stainless steel pedals are a nice touch, and we get a flat bottom steering wheel, which you cannot believe how cool that was in 2004 when it came out on the Mk5 Golf GTI. The standard car though didn't get the golf ball gear knob. We do on the Edition 30. Heated seats were standard. Generally with VWs, if they've got leather in a seat anywhere, they will give you seat heating, which is really nice of them, because that's not true with Audi. So yeah, there's enough in here to make it feel special, especially with the plaque, I suppose. Still got acres of elephant's bottom plastic, which was a Mark 5 thing that disappointed a lot of Mark 4 owners. But to be fair, it's aged pretty well, and ergonomically, obviously, it's brilliant. You can adjust the steering column up and down, in and out, which is something you can't do on the Up GTI. Auto headlights were standard as well. Let's have a look under the bonnet. You only got, by the way, before we look under there, halogen headlights. Some people think that the R32's xenons should have been standard on the Edition 30, but they weren't. You had to pay extra for them. Quite a few cars have got them, to be honest, but they weren't standard. Okay, so it's a pretty boring engine cover with a lot of plastic. The air filter's in here. Underneath there is a 4-cylinder 2-litre 16-valve engine with a turbocharger. Being an Edition 30, it's got the big turbo and a few other internal modifications that means it produces 230 horsepower, but can easily be remapped to a lot more, like 300. But we should really compare standard with standard, because otherwise things get a bit complicated. So it's 230 horsepower. I think it's 300 newton meters of torque. And it's a pretty reliable engine. Does need cam belt changes every 5 years. Okay, so that's the Mark 5 Golf Edition 30. Now for the Mark 5 Golf R32. Now there was no real signature colour for the Mark 5 Golf GTI, but Tornado Red was as close as you could get because it harked back to the good old days of the Mark 1 and Mark 2, and a lot of the early press cars were finished like that. But there was no doubt with the R32, this colour, deep blue pearl effect, was the colour. They even made the calipers match. It debuted on the Mark 4 Golf R32 and was completely unchanged for the Mark 5. Now a big difference really is the front end treatment. This has got honeycomb and a lot of black. This has got just normal slatted grills and a lot of shiny stuff, which isn't really something you associate with a hot hatch. But there we go, they were trying to differentiate between the two cars, and this car has a more mature, less aggressive image, which is reflected in the way it drives, which we'll come to later. You do get standard, these rather snazzy xenon headlamps that were available as an option on the rest of the range, including the Edition 30. But more importantly, you could say, is that you do get bigger brakes. So as well as being 10% more power, torque and cost and weight, you got 10% more brake discs. These are 345 millimeter one-piece steel discs versus 312 millimeter on the Edition 30, and these were pretty marginal on a standard car. On a remapped car, they're frankly nothing short of dangerous. Down the sides they're pretty similar. Funnily enough, the bolder side skirt of the Edition 30 appears to have been nicked wholesale from the R32. I didn't notice that until now. You get bigger brakes at the back, vented on this car versus just solid steel on this one. Now you probably never mistake an R32 for a GTI, even if it's in red. You can get them in red, though it's quite rare. Because of the exhaust, I still remember seeing the first one in Leicester, the Stratford showroom, and thinking, that's a very strange place to put an exhaust, but I think over time it's kind of, we've got used to it and it looks pretty good and it's very distinctive. You do get a smaller boot because of the four-wheel drive system, but they still give you a space saver spare wheel. So the difference in height pretty much is the bit you can't see on this plastic divider there. So it's a couple of inches, but it's still a very practical car. Still get the net, still get your curry hook, still get your ski hatch, still get your 12-volt socket. You get your cherry red rear light clusters shared with the Edition 30, but not fitted to any other model in the range. Let's have a look inside. Okay, so this car comes with optional Vienna leather in anthracite. Standard is a grey cloth trim called Monte Carlo, which just looks completely boring, almost like it was put in the car to make you want to spec another type of seat. You could get bucket seats as well, which were in the car that was in the 2017 video, and they look amazing, but they're not suitable for everybody really, because they don't have side airbags and they're not as comfortable as these. The big difference is that you get this lovely metal inlay in the door and the dash. It's called engine turned, reminds me of the big slab of metal you get on a Bentley. and it's there in the centre console as well, so that really does lift the cabin, and it does really need a lifting because it's pretty drab in many ways. Got the flat bottom steering wheel but no contrast stitching on there. I'll just get in. Probably the biggest bit of surprise and delight are the needles, which you can see illuminate in blue, which was specific to the R32. It's great until you start using your main beam at night and you get a bit confused as to whether it's on or off because you've got the blue of the needles, but that might just be me. Another oddity is that you get an R32 badged book pack, but it's got the red stripe of the GTI one, so they probably couldn't be bothered to make them in blue. So yeah, acres of elephant's bottom plastic as well. We've got cruise control, which again was optional. We've got a multi-play CD changer. Wow, I know, I can tell you're impressed because it says load there, so that's the RCD 500. Heated seats were not standard, but this car's only got them because it's got leather. So yeah, lots of things still missing from the spec of this car, and this hasn't even got rear parking sensors or a sunroof or a DSG box. Let's have a look under the bonnet now, because that's where the car's unique selling point resides. Now before I do that, I should point out this car is four-wheel drive, so it runs a Haldex coupling at the back, which it means it's mainly front-wheel drive, but when it senses slip at the front, it shifts power to the back. Okay, so there we have a 3.2 litre narrow angle V6, so it's a single cylinder head. That's the big difference between this car and a traditional V6, and that means it's a lot more compact. This one produces 250 horsepower, 320 newton meters of torque versus 230 horsepower and 300 newton meters of torque. So no turbos, nothing really to see. There's a bit of styling going on with the inlet manifold, but its real magic isn't under here, it's out the back. So let's just fire the old girl up, don't have to press the clutch, make sure it's not in gear. So even at idle there's a nice satisfying burble. The exhaust in this car was tuned much more than that in the Mark IV, which felt like they just slapped on an exhaust and went, yeah, that's fine. In this, they knew it had to sound good. So it's pretty unusual in its day in that you don't have to work it hard to make it sing. Even at like first and second gear, just driving around town, it does sound quite fruity. And even though it's valved, you can't make it quieter or louder, but I don't think it ever becomes annoying, and when you're cruising, it's very quiet. And on that point, I think it's a good time to go and drive these wonderful Mark 5 Golf based hot hatches. Okay guys, here we are behind the wheel of the Mark 5 Golf GTI Edition 30, and I have to admit, I am a bit of a fan of these cars. I had my Edition 30 project car from 2017 to 2019, did quite a few miles in that, actually used it as a daily, took it to the Nürburgring, drove around a few UK tracks, and I loved it. And I drive my wife's Mark 5 Golf GTI quite regularly, every week probably. That's on 17-inch wheels, and there isn't a car I've driven of any age with a sweeter ride and handling balance. It's comfortable, and yet it goes round corners like it's on rails. It's sublime. I mean, it's partly to do with the fact the engineers for the GTI came to the UK to set the car up for our very unique sort of surface quality, and they did an amazing job. So I'm wondering if the Mark 5 R32 can really be as good as that, because for me there is no better. What the Edition 30 gives you anyway is a very tractable engine. So there is a bit more lag than in the Mark 5 200 horsepower version, but it's not too bad, and you can still potter around. I mean, if I put it into fifth now, we're doing 1500 RPM at sort of 35 miles an hour, foot to the boards, and then 2, 5, it starts to get going. It's not the greatest sounding engine in the world, but it's got a bit of character. But it really, it's just a starter for the main course. which is a chassis. I mean, this car's on its original 111,000 mile dampers, and it still feels so amazingly sweet. I can't get over it. Maybe it softened it off a bit, because I do remember driving these back in the day on 18s, and they were quite firm, but it still feels planted. It's an amazing little car. The only sort of criticism I'd have of this car is that it isn't actually that great on fuel. You would assume an R32 would be worse, and the stats do suggest that, but in reality I don't think there's an awful lot in it. Good time to turn around. So, okay, we don't have four-wheel drive, but I think you can do a pretty good spirited start. Let's turn the ESP off and let's go. Okay, we do still get some wheel spin, but the upshot of that is that you have a lighter car that feels so much nimbler in the corners, because you're not carrying all that four-wheel drive. Plus, we don't have a big engine up front, so we've got a better weight balance, and it's got to be one of the best hot hatches, this. I mean, bearing in mind it's not hardcore like a Megane R26R. Your gran could drive it, but then this standard car still, it's such an amazing fun car to drive within the speed limit. Yeah, it's not hard to distinguish between this and the R32, although, as I say, I haven't really driven R32s much in recent years, so this, I've got an open mind and I'm fully prepared to be impressed with the R32. So without any further ado, let's see if I can get my words out and smile as much behind the wheel of the Golf R32. Okay guys, here we are behind the wheel of the Mk5 Golf R32, and I'm pretty sure I have not driven another one since I made that video back in the summer of 2017, but I still remember the first one I drove back in around 2008, and that was the first time I bought one. It was a 2006 black 3-door. I'd obviously driven loads of Mark IVs by that point, and it was such a different car, but how old was I then? I must have been 36, so I was getting on a bit, and I appreciated the comfort of that car compared to the Mark IV. It just was an easier car to take your wife out in without her complaining. So yeah, I still remember driving down a little B road near where my in-laws live in that car at about 60 miles an hour, and my wife not telling me to slow down. If we'd been in the Mark IV, she'd have pretty much hit me with a handbag quite a lot sooner. So I appreciated the ride quality of that car, allowed me to drive faster, and that's something that's stuck with me ever since. Today, what I'm quite surprised about with this car is that it actually feels firmer, definitely at sort of slower speeds anyway, than the Edition 30, and I think that probably comes down to the fact that because it's heavier, about 10% heavier, the tyre pressures have to be higher as well, so you really do feel it's a little bit crashy, which I'm quite surprised about. But I guess my comparisons were between this and the Mark IV, not between this and the GTI, and this is definitely a tiny bit firmer than the Edition 30, which is surprising. But this is weight. This is what weight does to a car. It means you have to have compromises, and you got a big engine, you got a four-wheel drive, but unfortunately all that in the same platform, the same tyre width, means that pressures have to be higher, dampers have to be harder. So yeah, that's the kind of a good example where the Edition 30 beats this car. We haven't even chucked it into any corners yet. The other thing about Mark 5 R32 and actually Mark 4s as well is that the clutches are very easy to slip and overlap with the throttle for some reason. That's never a problem with the 4-cylinder cars, so that's something very distinctive about driving one of these. But yeah, when you drive them sedately, they're pretty normal. I remember back in the day there were quite lots of older people driving these cars, and with an automatic box you can understand why they're perfectly docile. But when you open her up, drop a gear, so that's third. There's a background growl there, much more prominent and tuneful than a Mark IV. It still feels pretty mighty going into corners. There's a little bit more deflection when you hit a bump for sure compared to the GTI. It still feels good. Steering feels similar. I don't know if the rack's backed off a bit. It doesn't feel as direct. So here we are in that corner. So we're in 4th gear. Conditions are pretty good. So yeah, it feels a little bit vaguer on turning, like there is a 3.2 litre anvil at the front of the car trying to make it go the other way. But that felt pretty good. It's definitely more compression on that bump. That bump has helped me distinguish between quite a few cars recently, and that felt, compared to the 9 out of 10 for the Edition 30, I'd probably give that 7.5. But compared to the Mark 4, this is a much more finely tuned B-road tool. The Mark 4 was pretty clumsy on our UK roads. I'm sure it was ideal for the smooth roads of Germany, but over here it was just a little bit out of its depth. Right, let's turn around again and we'll get a clear run. Try a quick standing start. There is a car coming, let's have a go. Right, let's go. So we've got a bit of wheel spin last time. Let's just turn the hazards off. So yeah, a tiny bit of spin before it deflects to the back of the car. Oh, that made my spine tingle, I've got to tell you, that noise. It's very, very exciting. So if you're that kind of driver, you like straight line speed and the buzz of it, then this car really does have something the Edition 30 doesn't have, and it's still pretty good in the corners. But if you like corners like I like corners, you will want a car that's a bit more balanced in its weight, and you're not really worried about a standing start because you're not watching a car wear video. With drag races, you're watching a Volks with a video. With corners, well, that was still pretty damn good. So yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised by the chassis on this car. I haven't got a predetermined conclusion for this car. I am just literally computing everything now, and can I call it a draw? Because yeah, for me, I can see the appeal now of a hot hatch. You could have a Golf R Mark 7 and you could have this as your weekend car because they are so different. The Edition 30 and the Mark 7 actually aren't that different, to be perfectly honest. Same with the Mark 6R, they're all 2 litre, 4-cylinder, turbo, not 4-wheel drive, but you get my drift. It's the same sort of driving experience once you get going. But this is something rather different and very special. Sorry you're not around anymore. I guess we've got the 5-cylinder from Audi, which kind of captures some of the magic of not being a 4-cylinder. But yeah, this was a very, very special car. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this Volks Wizard video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, please comment, please share, please subscribe, click that bell icon or whatever people say you should do, but please do subscribe because it really means a lot. If I get more subscribers, I can make more videos, and I'll see you for the next one really soon.